Hey, how you doing? I'm Josiah Douglas. I do biblical inspiration and motivation here on YouTube 5 days a week. If this is your first time watching, maybe you should hit subscribe if that's the kind of thing that you're into. If this isn't your first time watching, thanks for coming back. I've got something pretty great to talk about today, and I stole it from another preacher, so you know it's probably true this time. Leviticus 7:37 says, "This is the law of the burnt offering, of the grain offering, of the sin offering, and of the guilt offering, of the ordination offering, and of the peace offering." Have you ever read Leviticus? Leviticus is kind of weird by today's standards. Seems like you start Leviticus and the first several chapters, it's all about killing stuff. That you kill this thing this way, you sacrifice this animal this way, you get up to some grains and you just have to offer them with some oil, so that's not that big of a deal. But then you have to kill this kind of animal and you can't eat the long lobe with the liver, and it's kind of gross, right? A couple weeks ago, I talked about how sometimes you have to look at the cultural context for verses and chapters and things in the Bible to make sense. So we're gonna look at the cultural context here. The Israelites, they weren't living the same way that we live today. They weren't living in the same world that we live today. The world around them was full of other gods and other idols that different cultures had come up with, and different cultures were sacrificing to and giving offerings to in different ways. You see, what generally happened with these other gods is the people who were serving them would come and bring these gods an offering. But you see, they didn't know how much to bring or what they should bring. So they'd bring an animal to sacrifice, or they'd bring grain as an offering, or they might even bring their children or some other person and sacrifice them to that god. But they wouldn't know what was enough to please the god. They wouldn't know exactly what it is that they needed to do to get the god to be favorable towards them. So if they wanted their crops to be good, they would say, bring the god a sacrifice and say, please make my crops better this next year. The next year, if their crops weren't better, they'd say, okay, well, I guess I better bring that god a bigger sacrifice. If their crops were better that year, they'd say, okay, well, I better bring an even bigger sacrifice. That way that the god doesn't get mad at me next time. There was always an uneasiness. They were always unsure how much of a sacrifice they should bring to their God, because there was nothing really saying what kind of sacrifice or how much they should bring to that God, because, well, that God wasn't really real. That's why the first several chapters of Leviticus are so amazing in the cultural context. You see, God is a real God. He wasn't just some fake God that you'd bring a sacrifice to and maybe things would go well for you and maybe they wouldn't, and then you wouldn't really know what kind of sacrifice you need to bring next time. God was very specific about what kind of sacrifices need to be brought at what time and when and why. So even though to you and me it may seem gross and disgusting and whatever else that they're sacrificing all these animals, and God is saying to not eat the long lobe of the liver and stuff like that, it was actually super revolutionary and super amazing that God was telling them exactly what they needed to sacrifice, when and why. Because no other gods had ever done that. No other gods had been specific about what it was that they needed to do. And that way the Israelites knew, this is what God expects of me. This is how much I need to give. I don't need to give more than this. I have all this rest of this stuff to keep for myself. So when you read Leviticus, it might seem gross, but honestly, it's pretty amazing in the context. Thanks for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button, leave a comment below. If you know somebody who might like my videos, why don't you share a link with them? If you haven't yet, hit subscribe and hit the bell. That way you get notifications every day when I come out with a new video like this. Thanks, guys. I will see you on Monday.